reflect and think a little bit about what we talked about this summer and what's been going on. I know a lot of you are regulars and have been able to participate and join with us for many of the sessions this summer. If you missed any, no problem at all. I've got an esteemed panel. I'm not going to try and reintroduce all of these folks. I'll let them say a quick hello. Again, I'm Will Brown, a professor here at the Bush School and director of the Center for Nonprofits and Philanthropy. Thrilled to be able to have you join us here for this session. So a couple of objectives. One is to reflect on all the material that was offered this summer. And so we've got nearly all the panelists that presented from the summer, and Tasha Cantrell-Bruce will join us in a little bit. And I know Dr. Deborah Kerr is going to have to head out early. So we're going to make sure that she gets a chance to talk just a little bit. So we'll get some reflections from each one of the panelists. But I actually we'd like to really hear from you too. So you can use the chat box now to pose a couple of questions to the panelists, to the group, reflect back on some of the things that you heard. The environment continues to change. Part of what we were just chatting about now is how kind of difficult it is to navigate some of this stuff. And so it's a bit of an open conversation as well. So I think we can make the most of that. My session was on boards, talked about boards, the importance of boards and the importance of sort of building that in. Royce joined us in that session, was real helpful in sort of giving some thoughts and some advice. And as we plan for the fall, we'll probably lay out a couple of more sessions around some of this. So also what I'd love to see is ideas or thoughts about topics that we might like to have for future webinars. So with that, I might just kind of go around to the heads that are there in reference to the panel. And Robbie, you're up first, if that's all right. If you don't mind just saying a quick hello. And
yeah, absolutely. Do you want us to reflect any or just introduce ourselves a little bit?
I mean, anything, if you want to, if you ask some questions or anything to get us started is fine too. Take a few minutes.
Hi, everybody. I'm Robbie Robichaux, and I did the session on social innovation and what it looks like right now for the nonprofit sector. And so I think that we're all in the same boat. Nothing has changed really since that panel this summer. And I think everyone's trying to figure out how to be innovative, how to solve problems, how to think critically and try new things and maybe fail. And so just some overall thoughts I thought would be nice to share is, for one, is going back to your organization, your people in your organization, and being sure you're asking them for solutions to problems. Sometimes we think the solutions have to come from the outside, and they often come from our stakeholders, those that work for us, those that are on our board, and our clients and beneficiaries. So depending on what you're trying to do, I think it's time to talk to everyone that you can. Another thought is think about innovation in different ways. Innovation doesn't have to always be a new service, but it could be a new way of delivering service. It could be a new way of processes. I think probably every nonprofit has had to find a way to handle their staff differently and let them work remotely or on different rotating days, or ways to communicate with their clients. So innovation can come through the process. It can come through the service. It can also come through new markets, looking outside, finding new ways to generate revenue that maybe you haven't done before. And then finally, I think, thinking about your sources of supply and demand. Where are you getting your products from? For someone at a food bank, they've had to think about what distributors they're using and the pricing that they're able to get. And now food banks are competing with vendors, grocery stores from across the country. And so I think we have to just be constantly brainstorming new ways to solve our problems, especially in regards to the social impact we want to have, or the economic viability and our capacities. And so knowing where we're at and talking to our people and our stakeholders, I think, is just part of being innovative at this time. I'll let someone else speak, but I'm happy to kind of flesh out some ideas about that later on in the panel. So if you have questions about your mission or your services or delivery, I think that would be a great discussion, because I think we're all trying to find new ways to solve problems right now.
Perfect. Thank you, Robbie. That sets us up good and gives some ideas and some thoughts about where people could ask some questions or explore a little bit deeper. Deborah, do you mind going ahead and
I do not. I'm Deborah Kerr, and I talked about employees and employee engagement. Just want to remind everybody to remember what Robbie said. There is nothing, there's no training, there's no disaster planning, there's no communication strategy or resilience effort that could ever prepare us for this. So we are really looking at figuring it out, doing that innovation. From the time that I talked with you about employees, I was looking at the issue of burnout, which employees may be experiencing now. And I found out, did not know this, you all may know this, that in 2019, the World Health Organization identified burnout as an occupational phenomenon and added it to its diagnostic health information. You know, that international classification of diseases, it's in there now. And that's disturbing. And here's the definition: feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion. Raise your hand if you've had that. Oh my gosh. Yeah, really. And feeling increased mental distance from your job, maybe even feeling cynical about your job. And then last, they're looking at burnout as feeling a lower level of professional efficacy, which is really, that's really significant. And so as a reminder, remember your employees are going through the same kinds of things that you are. It is helpful for them to have you as leaders remind them of the values of your organization. Keep that consistent message going out. And be sure your managers are doing the same in terms of values. Secondly, and I know you're doing this, touching base with employees about their physical and mental health. How are they managing to handle the stress that is going to lead to burnout? And then the last thing is make sure that you are considering the workload of your team members. What we know is that people who are excited about their job and engage with their job, sounds like a lot of people we work with, they tend to work longer hours, and that might lead to exhaustion, and work may begin to feel burdensome. They may feel overwhelmed. They may feel like the job is too difficult for them to do anymore. So be aware of that, and also be aware that the research shows that this mental orientation is going to be with us for a while. It will be at least 3 years post this immediate environment where we will still, or we can still expect to see the effects of the experience that we've been through in this pandemic. So we have a road ahead of us.
Thanks, Deborah. Mary, you want to share a little bit?
Yes, hello everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm Mary Hildebrand. I'm on the faculty of the Bush School and the Director for International Programs for the Center. And I had a session this summer where I talked about a concept of adaptive leadership, which is kind of, in some ways, a different view of leadership than we often have. But just to, it seems to me, I think it's always helpful. And it's a concept of leadership that isn't just for the heads of organizations, but for anybody in an organization to be able to exercise leadership. It seems to me it's very relevant right now. I mean, the idea of adaptive leadership is that leadership is helping an organization or a community come to solutions of its problems, and helping the people in the organization to face those problems and to find solutions. So in some ways, I think it connects really nicely with what Deborah was just talking about, and also what Robbie mentioned about finding solutions in your own organization, and not kind of thinking that you as the head of the organization have to come up with them yourself. And the idea, so just some of the key concepts just to remind people who attended that session, one concept of getting up on the balcony above the dance floor so that you don't see just the movement right around you, but you see the overall patterns in your organization or your community, so that you really understand what's happening and what the dynamics are. Listening to your people and not falling into the trap of letting them wait for you to do all the work, putting the work back on the people in the organization in terms of figuring out, how do we face this problem? What kind of changes do we as an organization and do we as individuals within the organization need to make? He also then talks about taking care of yourself, that exercising leadership is a risky business and a difficult business. And so some of the particular suggestions, having a confidant, somebody who you can talk to and somebody who can give you open, honest opinions about what you're doing and what the problems are in the organization. Also finding allies at different levels or different parts of the organization to help you have a view and to help you have a voice in different parts. And then just sanctuary. And this goes very much to what Deborah was talking about. These are hard times. And I think every organization is facing having to figure out how to deal with this new world that we live in. And we all know it's not easy. And so we have to take care of ourselves. We have to take care of our people. So he talks about the author who really has worked out this approach, really talks about finding a sanctuary for yourself, something that keeps you sane, whether it's riding a bicycle or swimming or meditating, something different for everyone, but somewhere where you can find peace and take care of your own mental and spiritual well-being. So those are just some of the ideas, and it just seems to me that these concepts are helpful at this point in time, as we all have to think about how are we as organizations and as people in organizations adapting to the changes that we are forced to adapt to at this point. It's not so much our choice, but we are having to deal with them, and that's a challenging thing. So I'm hoping that some of those ideas can be useful for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Appreciate it. Angela, you want to say a few words and thoughts?
Sure. Hi, everyone. So glad to see a lot of you that have been with us all summer. I talked a little bit about policy and PPP loans and things like that in the beginning, but probably something you're still a little more interested in is the second session when I talked about fundraising. We do know that it's still a difficult environment, but we are learning a lot about it. Dr. Kerr just mentioned it's going to be probably 3 years until we start, realizing the effects of all this. And then looking back at fundraising research, we're probably looking at 3 to 4 years before we could return to that level of giving. So we also need to think about sort of a longer term adjustment and how we're handling fundraising. We do continue to see more money coming from donor advised funds than ever. So if you know constituents that have those, that is definitely a good conversation to be having right now. We know that organizations that are reaching out and continuing to steward their donors are having positive results, staying in touch with them, listening to what their needs are, but making sure that their constituents are still aware that your good work is going on. That's one of the best things we can do with fundraising right now. The other thing that I think we've entered a time, and I mentioned it briefly this summer, but I think now we're really hitting a point in this cycle where we should be looking at our internal operations and making sure that we're taking this time to clean our databases, look at any of our internal gift processing policies, things like that, to make sure that we can come out of this stronger. And, hopeful that we will see an increase in gifts in November and December. But between now and October is really a good time to start preparing and tightening our operations. And the last tip that I would throw out there, and of course I'm happy to try and answer any questions you have, but the last one would be about all of these types of things, our online events. So what we've started looking at is, there are so many different creative ways that people are doing their events, but let's not call them virtual, and let's not call out, like, oh, I'm so sorry you couldn't be here tonight with the gala. Let's get rid of the negative part. Just say, thank you for joining us tonight, and trying to embrace that, because it makes us feel like we're really more connected and more together if we don't keep pointing out that we aren't. So that's one of the big lessons I've seen in events planning. So with that, I'll pass it on to somebody else, but I'm happy to entertain your questions and glad you're here with
Wonderful. Kenny's up next.
Yeah, Kenny Taylor, faculty at the Bush School, and I serve as Director of Outreach and Professional Development through the center. And my webinar was on nonprofit leadership in turbulent times. And just to reflect a bit on, I think what we presented was a focus on how we perform as leaders while we're in turbulent times. And you've heard some of this already from from those that have spoken, that it's a scary time, and leadership is testing and trying new things, and everyone doesn't want to be in the seat, but those of us who are, it's extremely important that we reflect on how we perform through these times. And I guess the question that I really tried to set up in my webinar was, what have you personally done? What have we personally done to minimize the effects of whatever crisis is at hand? So these webinars really started in the name of us shifting as a school to help serve or better serve the organizations that we work with, our local nonprofits. So COVID started all of this. And then, of course, all the social, racial unrest with the murder of George Floyd. And even if it wasn't either of those two events, I know here in Texas, we dealt with Hurricane Harvey. If Hurricane Harvey wasn't around, then it's something financial at our organizations. So the question at the end of the day is, what have we personally done as those that sit in the seat to really minimize what's going on, regardless of what crisis is at hand? And just since I had the conversation earlier with the board that I sit on, as we think about, performance, one of the things that tends to keep coming up is those partnerships that we're developing with other organizations in our communities. And really had to have a hard conversation this morning with our CEO about, what we aren't, or what programs we aren't trying to do when we know that there's organizations that do it better in the communities that we serve, so that we don't play in that space, and really kind of figure out what our strategic plans are. I think on one of our webinars, we spoke about, it's so hard to do planning, whether it be what we're used to along the lines of 3 to 5 years, but things are moving so fast. But the conversation I had this morning really had to do with, even with all of that, we still need to figure out a way to plan for who we really are and what we're trying to deliver in terms of our missions at our organization. So partnerships is really the piece that I would end on. And that my focus, again, in terms of the webinar that I presented, was what we are personally responsible for as leaders. And then the ultimate question, I guess, in our communities to whoever it is that we report to, is the staff that looks at you or that relies on you, is what did we do in the role as a leader to really minimize what's going on, regardless of what crisis is at hand or up next.
Thanks, Kenny. Ellie, you up for saying hello?
Hi, everybody. I am Dr. Chu. I'm an assistant professor here, and I did a topic this summer on building nonprofit financial resilience. As several of our speakers just emphasized again, this is a situation that if we don't get out of this pandemic, the economy is probably not going to come back. And in the long term, not long term, in the short term, this the funding environment is not looking good for our nonprofit organizations. So part of the financial management and financial planning, our mindset is to prepare for worse situations like this. But probably the most brilliant of us didn't expect something as bad as this last year in your budget planning. So this is a time to really micromanage your finances, your cash flows, monitor and maintain your liquidity target. This is the time to rid of your bad financial habit, especially if you don't have a liquidity management. And this is the time to leverage all your funding relations and to seek for community support from all your stakeholders, sometimes perhaps including your community banks. And this is a time to really aggressively seeking funding opportunities and to innovate the way the different types of fundraising programs that transform your traditional fundraising to maybe more innovative fundraising online. And to avoid us from being in this kind of survival mode in future, the big lesson is really to learn while we're struggling to manage, to take on this challenge, is to learn and grow out of this survival mode. It's to think in the long term, to think about how to build your financial sustainability. So in the long term, we really need to think about, and it's something we have to start thinking about now, is how to build at least 6 months worth of cash reserve to prepare for situations like this, and to think about diversifying revenue sources. Don't put your eggs in one basket, and to think about strengthen your community support, which comes handy at this point, and to think about evaluating your business model in terms of both your financial and social impact, to grow those that brings you the most financial and social impact, to put a stop sign in those that does not really make sense socially and financially. So I'd be happy to take more questions. That's the summary of the talk I did. Thanks.
Perfect. Thanks, Sally. Jenny, from the road.
Hi, apologies in advance that I am on the side of the road on I-10, somewhere between San Antonio and Houston. There's children to be picked up. The show must go on. I am here. I'm Dr. Jenny Morrison. I am both faculty in our online education at the Bush School, as well as Director of Programming for the Education Division for the Handel Group. And we were Gaby Jordan and I were very honored to be invited to come and speak with this group a couple of weeks ago. And I wanted to just summarize, if you'll remember, for those of you that were on the call, the Handel Group, we are a coaching firm, and we really work on helping people to really write and actualize their dreams. And in this particular piece, we were really looking at your internal advisory board. And for those of you that were on the call, you'll remember that Gaby did a great job at introducing this notion of the chicken, the brat, and the weather reporter, and thinking about how, just as a quick reminder, the chicken is our fear-based thinking. The brat is those when we don't want to do things or we feel like we deserve things. Happens a lot in our vices and our eating and our exercise. And then our weather reporter, which is really coming up a lot during the pandemic, which is how it is very easy to report on life and things as if it's the weather, right? You're just passing us by. And of course, with so much uncertainty in the world, it is easy to feel sort of in that more passive victim stance. And so I just am here really, I think Gaby would want me to remind everyone of that and remember to dream. If you would love to spend a few minutes at the end of the call, if anyone would like to share, if they are working, if any of the dreams have helped to connect some dots around all of these issues that all the other panelists are bringing forward. If the dreaming is an orienting activity that helps you rejuvenate as by your, on your own, or if you've been able to use any of this work to activate, sort of some inspiration between yourself and colleagues. And also curious if anyone had followed with any of their promises and consequences, because so much of what, especially what Mary made some great, everyone did, but Mary was talking about, building a sanctuary and really making sure you're rejuvenating. And Deborah talked about some of the same issues. And it's like, at the end of the day, you've got to make sure, I think as leaders, many of you are the last one to get taken care of. And so I'd be curious to hear if any of this dreaming helps people to maintain their work-life balance, or, you know, is helping to connect in the specific promises, consequences, action for yourself that keep you, you know, moving forward in a positive way. But I think I'll leave it with that. But just say thanks to everybody for being here today. This is really lovely.
Thank you. One more panelist. So Tasha Cantrell-Bruce was able to join us as well. So Tasha, if you got a few minutes, just introduction and any thoughts that you might want to have or reactions to what people have said already is fine.
Okay. Well, thank you. And my apologies for arriving a few minutes late. I had a board meeting I was just coming from. My name is Tasha Cantrell-Bruce, and I am an instructor with Texas A&M Bush School. And this past summer, I was able to present on environmental scanning. And in addition to my role with Texas A&M, I also teach with the University of Southern Indiana. And I have a kind of a feet on the ground approach to life that I always have, either consulting or practitioner roles as well. So I also do some of that work in Indiana as well. And I've been using environmental scanning in a little bit of a different way based on the nonprofits I've been working with. I kind of took from my background in nonprofit marketing and somewhat adjusted that a little bit this summer. And some of you are familiar with environmental scanning being a political, economic, social, cultural, and technological way of looking at these external environments in the world and how it impacts your organization. And because of the pandemic being one, but also things such as going all the way back to Hurricane Katrina to Harvey and everything else going on in the world, I added an environmental piece in there. And not to take away from the word environmental scanning, but I thought if we're looking at these factors that are possibly affecting the way we do our work, there's more than political, social, cultural, in technological and economic things. There are also environmental things going on. And so that's why I kind of tweaked that acronym a little bit. And I've been using that with multiple nonprofits. And then I also help them with internal scanning as well. I don't think I got into this as much with my workshop I did, but I also, again, borrowing from the marketing standpoint as people are re-envisioning their role in the nonprofit sector. And I even just talk with them about sometimes it's difficult to get nonprofit leaders into the mindset, not necessarily a business mindset may not be appropriate for that particular organization, but for them to think kind of rationally and about what product are we providing our clients, and services are a product. Where are we having them, looking at place, where are we having them come for our services? Do we need to adjust that? Technology kind of plays into that. Are we now doing virtual counseling with our clients? So you have product and place and price, what's the psychic cost and the material cost, and promotion. How are we reaching people? Because we know that a digital divide still exists. And if we're cut off from part of our target population, how do we still reach out to them? And I was actually, I mentioned that because I was in the board meeting I was in was on tobacco prevention and how they reach people in the southern part of the county they're with, because there's very little access to internet in that southern county. And they still want to reach out to those students with tobacco education. So that's a little bit about what I presented on, and a couple of reactions. Interesting. One thing this is just my own little way I think. I try to look at turning things, as Jenny may have said, dreaming a little bit to reimagine what's going on in the world around me. And I hear this phrase new normal quite a bit. And I personally, professionally and personally, don't buy into new normal, that phrase. I like, from my nerd past, I like to think of it as the new frontier as we embark on the opportunities ahead of us. And I think that it provides an opportunity to think about recreating everything we do in the nonprofit sector. It's a great time to recreate and rebuild in a lot of different ways, and maybe some ways we haven't even thought of yet. And so I try to look at this as as a horrible situation, but being able to use the situation to make some great positive changes in the way we serve nonprofit clients and purposes. And then I'll reach out to, was it Shane? Did I say that right? I think the one that talked about nonprofit finance. I forget who spoke about that, but I do have an interesting thing that those of you in the finance world, again, coming from this board meeting, I was able to secure, and I bring this up not as an individual story, but something those of you working in nonprofit finance may run into, and I don't know, I'm happy to hear from you about it, you know, offline, if it's a better situation. But I was able to secure a $10,000 grant for a local nonprofit hospital. And it was for tobacco prevention education. And they wanted to hire someone, the money was actually to hire someone for 1 day a week for about a year, and reach out to teenagers on tobacco prevention education, engage them in advocacy, things like that. And it was a few months ago we received the grant, and they chose today to not use the grant and to give it back. And the reason they said, the reason that the discussion, it wasn't my decision, but the reason they chose was because they have a lot of, as the only trauma one hospital in that region, they have a lot of respiratory technician positions and nursing positions in the respiratory department that people will not apply for. And their philosophy at the hospital was, we cannot justify hiring someone to do education and outreach if we can't fill the positions to do our essential services as a nonprofit hospital. Not my job really to disagree or agree with them, because I was facilitating, but I don't know if any of you have run into that, or just kind of be aware that there are some people, some nonprofit organizations that are at that situation, deciding how do we use our money and what principles are we going to use to make that decision.
Thanks, Tasha. That's a great question. I mean, it ties into what Kenny says. You also meant referenced off of Ellie's and Dr. Chu's sort of reflection there. So, I mean, either one of you want to react, or others, the panelists. And then, of course, it's open now. I mean, I encourage you to post questions in the chat board, or it's a little hard to track. So probably the easiest is to do that. And we'll probably call on you through the chat board if that works, or at some point, if you want to speak up, feel free to as well. But Ellie or Kenny, do you want to react to that? Nope, neither one of them are. They're waiting. They're waiting for each other. All right.
Ellie, you want to grab that one?
Yeah. So Tasha, the case you were saying is the hospital decided to redirect their funding purpose during this time, right?
There we go. When you say redirect, you mean to use the $10,000 in a different way? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, they take it back. Probably it's repurposing it.
Right. They returned it to the state agency that was going to grant them the $10,000. So they refused the $10,000.
They refused
it back.
Yeah.
That we're not going to use it because it was specifically targeted just for a personnel for 1 day a week for outreach and education for youth. And they said they could not accept it because they cannot fill other essential positions.
Yeah. Well, that's a brave choice in this time when most of organizations are struggling to get more funding. I don't know if they try to negotiate the term for it to cover more staff or more programs. Probably negotiated, it didn't work well, and financially, it does not make sense as a financial person. But I'm a nonprofit finance person, so I cannot just think about the simple bottom line of the profits. I have to think about, does it make sense? Because I showed a chart, a figure in my talk, is that you have to think about where this program fits into my social and financial impact.
Right.
If this thing bring in and did not grow use social impact, and that's the choice of this organization to reject it. Eventually running this program if it does not grow your social impact, you really need to think about it is something we want to cost us financially, because running a program comes as the expense.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
And I think that they are doing quite a bit of they're trying to recruit as many and from different, from a variety of tactics. They're trying to recruit people to apply for these positions in the nursing and the respiratory techs. They have the money for these positions. It's just no one is applying to the respiratory department. And so that was, it was unfortunate.
So it's interesting how they saw the conflict. I mean, because when you think about it from the outside, it doesn't seem like they're taking that money and doing that program took anything away from their main mission. It doesn't have anything to do with whether they can fill those jobs or not. So was it their organizational capacity? Did they feel that they had to be so focused on the respiratory challenges and trying to get people on that side that they simply couldn't devote any thought to this other thing that they didn't see as important? I mean, it seems like maybe that would be a reason to do that it's a distraction from their main problem. But I just wonder how they were seeing it.
Yeah, that was, so capacity was one aspect that was brought up during that component. There was, I think there was also, when I say political, I don't mean as in, Democrat, Republican, but I think there were some political aspects from community members on the board and being concerned about that, when there's a rise in pandemic needed responses, that they're under capacity to handle a large influx right now. And so that was another issue that was brought up.
Right. They're not, in some sense, they got to do their core work better before they can start doing some of these extra. It touches in a little bit to your point, Kenny, don't you think?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, I would agree with, what Ellie said and others in terms of the response. I mean, it's a rare occasion that folks will deny money, but I've certainly seen it happen before with, thoughtful leadership, governance from the board level, where it just doesn't align. And I could totally visualize that in this environment when we're having to be, fairly thoughtful about what we jump into as an organization. So my guess is that discussion was had at that board level somewhere with the leadership. And though it may have been a tough decision and rare, I've certainly seen it happen at other organizations before.
And I say like that they approved the grant approval, applying for the grant back in December. So obviously, as you know, sometimes it takes quite a few months to get grant responses. And so their application for the grant was, back in December, before the pandemic was going on, but before it actually really hit.
Sue, you said you want to have a comment?
Yes, as a former respiratory therapist,
Okay.
and just keeping up with the events of COVID, I had a smoking cessation program, and that would entail that the appropriate person to do this program that they'd apply for would be a respiratory therapist. So that would be, or a nurse, and both of them are hard to get right now. So I could see capacity being an issue.
Richard Rhodes has asked. Richard, you want to just go ahead and ask your question that you were thinking about? It touches on a couple of others, or I can read it out.
Sure. The question I pose is, and listening to the conversation about around that grant, my mind was thinking of some organizations I'm aware of that seem to be stuck in a survival crisis mode of thinking. That survival, they're not even envisioning the possibility of it potentially, that they're really at that critical stage. So I'd like to hear from the panel suggestions on how to help shift the participants away from survival crisis thinking to a more hope-filled, a more dreaming, a more possibility capacity?
I have some experience with helping organizations do that, and just helped an organization about a week ago. And their board really was stuck very specifically where you've described. One thing that I've seen helps is to actually gently point out to the board what's happening. Talk about scarcity mode, and talk about the fact that that we have to think about our mission and redirect their energy to really the vision of your organization. And that's what I've found most successful the times I've worked with organizations, is to say, let's forget about the day-to-day just for a little bit, and remember what we're all trying to achieve together. And if you pull them into the vision mode and can kind of get some good conversation generating around their plans for the future, the what ifs, I've seen that take off fairly naturally. But given where we are today, there are folks that are going to say, that's great, but if we're not open in 3 months, it doesn't matter. Right. So it's a tough balance, but that's been the quickest way that I've been able to help organizations move through it. It's really more through strategic planning methods of visioning and focusing on your mission.
Yeah, it's tricky, right? Because I mean, you have those conversations sometimes, and yet you still sort of feel like, okay, but I still didn't solve the fact that I've got to meet payroll at the end of the month, or I've got to pay rent, or what have you, in reference, or I got to get a little bit more revenue coming in. But I think it's particularly important to try and be able to get those shifts. I mean, you can see it, right? The importance of trying to figure out a way to shift that orientation. I come back to the, it seems a little tried and true, but I come back to the values and come back to the vision. What are we really trying to be able to do here, and thinking about how to be able to do it. Robbie, did you have something you were thinking about?
Well, yeah, I just think there's some really great, I know this sounds so academic-y, but some really great books, particularly like The Art of Innovation or Change by Design. And basically what they say, right, is that these solutions need to come from the inside, but if you're not asking your employees to help you solve problems, they're not thinking that way. And so like brainstorming sessions where you just come up with many ideas as possible. So if you're trying to solve a money problem, don't assume you can't be innovative because you don't have money. That's a myth. You use your resources, your HR people, capitalize on what you have and the different capacities you're good at. Go to those people and try to come up with as many solutions as possible. Something happens in people's minds, to someone's point earlier in the panel, when you're asked to reframe problems as solutions. And it's just, for no other reason, it kind of improves morale, that people are like, well, we came up with 100 solutions. No, they don't have to be good. That's not the point. It's just the idea that getting people brainstorming and innovating and come up with solutions to products and processes and financial situations gets people thinking about them. A lot of times really great ideas, they start by building on someone else's idea. And so when you come up with a list of 50 solutions, pick your top 5 and then say, and then what, and then what, and then what, and see how they build on top of each other. And so I totally get this idea that we have, me personally, right, have been really deficit thinking. Oh, things are so bad. How am I going to teach for the fall? Like, I have all these problems with my classes and my students are going to be disengaged. And I have to tell myself, well, what's really great about this online feature? Oh, people are going to be safe, hopefully. And, I'm having to learn some new technology, and that's good, because as I get older, I'm less likely to do these things. And so I think it is really hard to reframe the positive when things feel so bad. But I also think in an organizational context and a culture, these are things a leader would want to promote their employees to be thinking like.
Christy, Bryce, you had a question.
Oh, sorry.
Jenny, did you want to chime in? Sorry.
I was just going to chime in really quickly just to say that, the more that you can invite people to consider that notion of an empowered authorship and how, we're existing in the crisis survival mode. But again, I'll go back to connecting to a dream. And if you had the dream, the vision, reconnecting and saying, okay, so how can we move back into that authorship role when it's very easy to be in what we would call the weather reporting role, and we're in crisis, this is as good as it gets.
That is a powerful piece of your stuff, of the stuff that you use. So thank you. Yeah, that taking charge of that. Christy, Bryce, did you want to ask your question? You were asking, thinking about innovation and such.
Hey, Robbie, you talked in your webinar series on the myths of innovation. And I was wondering if you have any other suggestions for buy-in strategies that we could utilize to further innovative discussions with board members and donors.
Sorry, I was on mute. There you go. Yeah, I think that there's really some good stuff around co-creating with the community, and that would include your donors and your board and helping bringing it. So to me, it's more about assessing a situation, to little Tasha's point, doing an environmental scan, understanding what's going on, and then going to your board and saying, what knowledge do you have? What are we missing? And how do we come together to kind of solve this? So to me, it's more of like having that frank conversation, but to me, it's so easy because I think that most people, when you ask them for their opinion, they've got one. Right. And sometimes it's good and sometimes it's not. You don't have to evaluate their opinion, but by bringing them in the process, they're more likely to come back to you later with ideas by just opening that space. So potentially having a board session where you do some brainstorming ideas around a problem and you have people write as many solutions to a problem by themselves and then come together and see if you can get to 100 solutions. Even if it's not good, that doesn't matter. Because the problem with creativity and the way the brain works is it gets stifled if you start evaluating the solutions. So if the goal is to get to 100, it doesn't matter how silly or random. Most likely you're going to have 5 or 10 viable solutions that you can try out. I mean, that's very practical, but I think there are ways of like making one board member be, I think I talked about the cross-dresser as like what we call hot groups. And so the idea, right, is that person's job is to kind of work all the ideas together and be creative, or someone essentially playing the devil's advocate, like put people in roles. You could do that in a board meeting. You could assign people particular roles, like someone's a visionary, someone's the troubleshooter about why these solutions won't work out, someone's just coming up with as many ideas as possible, and giving people something to work towards, I think, is really key. I'm sure other panelists have great comments to add to that too.
I mean, just to highlight one that you mentioned was the importance of you talk about, bringing some information in to frame the conversation a little bit but then just to reinforce the making room for people to have the conversation. We talk about that a lot in board meetings. There just is never any room, and room being time, right? Making the time to allow people to actually say, we're going to just spend the next half an hour. It's okay, even if we don't fully know where we're going. But here's some general things. Here's some information that I want to have. How can we add to this, and something to try and guide the conversation? Like you say, I'm sure others have some thoughts as well.
One reason this kind of combines both the innovation on the board, the brainstorming, and the scarcity piece. When we're going through a planning process for nonprofits, if you remember, we do the strategic plan first, and then we talk about really the business planning, and the fund development plan comes at the bottom, right? So it doesn't hurt to like remind people of that when you're trying to kind of solve your way out of solutions. Is we tend to go into this money crisis situation because that's where a lot of us are living right now. But our solutions, like Robbie said, are stifled if we stay down there. So we don't ever start by, if we had the money, we could do X. And if you can remind them of that, I think it's helpful. And sometimes even just drawing it out for them, it kind of helps them understand that we're tracking this backwards. So that's been something I've tried once or twice, and it's worked, and more than once or twice. But I always feel bad when I lay it out, because it does make you feel like, oh, we are doing this completely backwards. Right. It's shaking up our thought process, but it's been really effective.
Well, one of the things from the webinar series has caused our organization is to definitely, from all the webinars, to take a step back and kind of reevaluate our organization. And then in some side work that we're doing with a consultant and stuff, that's further strengthened our organization at this time. So I am at the point where we're at is the board has a consent agenda. So we do have that time on there to have these discussions. And then in talking with my consultant recently, she was saying, give them some discussion points so y'all can have that discussion. So I developed that this time. So where I'm at now is getting them to, be ready to have these thoughtful discussions. I'm asking them to start doing something that they haven't ever been asked in a few years. So that kind of buy-in and just get that type of energy going.
Thanks, Christy. Yeah, those are good. Other questions, other thoughts or reactions?
I guess I just have one thought about it, which is that, and I think this fits with what Robbie was saying, that it really is important to not go, at least in some circumstances, to not go in with preconceived notions of your own, of what should be done. If you are working with your team, whether it's the board or whether it's the staff members of the organization, to brainstorm and to come up with what better ways of fulfilling the mission, solutions to problems, it's really important to really value their ideas. I mean, I think one risk is you have these conversations, but you've already decided what you actually think is important and what you're going to do. And so I think it's sort of easy for us all to think that way, but that is a real risk, because if people are asked to participate and then that participation isn't valued and validated as really the source of ideas and plans going forward, then it delegitimizes it and it makes people not want to participate in the future. So just the idea of having the discussions, having the real participation of people is important, but doing it in a way that is real for them and for the organization. Just something, I think, a risk that we need to be real careful about.
Another question anybody want to pose to the panelists? I just made a note in the chat box that we're looking for ideas. I mean, this is, I mean, we can certainly hear from some of these panelists again. I know that we're always open to, you'll probably get another one from me. I think I already penciled myself in to do something on boards here in the fall. So you're stuck with that perhaps, but we have others. Kenny said we have a variety of other folks too. Topics related to any of the ones that we got from people here. Deborah Kerr had to leave a little early. We always like to pull Deborah Kerr back in and let her do another section. So we're looking for some ideas or thoughts. So that's another thing that you can share with us as well before we got about 5 minutes left. So we're open for another question, other ideas. Panelists, if you've got anything you'd like to add or pose to people, we're open to that as well.
Dr. Brown, this is Tanya Gillespie with Taylor's Place. I just want to say thank you to, I'll put my video on here. Thank you to all the panelists and all the sessions. You know, as a lot of you know, because I've sat in on a lot of these, but we have a really small nonprofit. We're still fairly new, and my husband and I both work full-time jobs and trying to juggle all this. And then you throw in a pandemic. And so this has been very helpful for us. It's just all the wisdom and expertise and knowledge and guidance that all of y'all have provided. And I know our board president was able to sit in on some of the sessions as well. And then she has brought those to the meetings. And it's just really, I can't express how helpful that this has been. My head's about to explode, but taking all of it in. And I'm also, as Dr. Taylor knows, I'm a doer. And so I learn something and then I go implement. And so, you know, I'm trying not to throw everything at everybody at one time,
right.
But we are in a time where we kind of do have to do that. I mean, because we're having to make so many changes and so quickly. And then it really kind of helped us and catapulted us to make some changes so we can still do what we need to do for fall and reach our kiddos and stuff. So we're excited. So
wonderful. Thank you, Tanya. Appreciate you always being a participant and being part of our work. So appreciate that. I'm glad that you found it useful. Renee Franklin, did you have a question that you wanted to? I saw somebody said you raised your hand.
Yes, I did. I don't know if my video is kind of weird. So you see two of me, so I'm going to turn it
there
off.
You are. Yes, I do.
My phone's having a little issue. So I'm new to this process, but I am a officer in several small nonprofits, And I haven't been, I'm also new to the Bush graduate certificate for nonprofit. So this is all new to me,
Wonderful.
but I'm awesome experience. So as a leader, we've just experienced the loss of both a board member and a advocate within several of my nonprofits. How, as a leader, do you keep your organization going? Sorry, so recent. How do you keep your organization going at the same time you've got to replace this person on your board, and you've got to keep your organization going when they're all hurting as well?
Right.
So that's my question.
Yeah.
If you heard it through the quiver in my voice, I apologize.
Yeah,
So how do you keep your organization focused and going
when you've had a loss?
when you've had a major loss?
Right. Right.
Yeah, I would just jump in real quick and say that nonprofit leaders, public service leaders are extremely resilient, and I take it that that's the case with you. And to not put all the weight on yourself, even with the loss of a board member, that you have other members and other advocates, even if they aren't on your board. It may even come from some of your staff members, regardless of the size of your organization. So that was one of the messages, that I wanted to communicate, and I didn't want to lead off based on that quiver in your voice, is that along with, like I mentioned, our leaders being extremely resilient, at the same time, even with that quiver in your voice and the way that you care, at the end of the day, we're responsible for getting through these times. And so what I'm saying is, you're responsible for holding this together. And what research says, what my experience says, is that you and others that have been joining us all this times are the ones that tend to do just that.
Mm-hmm.
So, keep the faith, and don't feel like all of that pressure is on yourself. And whether it be those that are officially voting members with power at your organizations, they don't have to be to help, because you certainly have advocates. So just keep that in mind and know that you'll get through it.
Yeah, it's hard to say that we'll get through, but it is part of the message that, I mean, I've watched organizations lose people and key individuals, and that perseverance that you all demonstrate again and again and again is really amazing in many ways. And it's difficult and unfortunate through difficult times. The other piece is the importance of taking time. I mean, it's okay to take some time. I mean, even in some of the most critical places, I've seen organizations just take just a modest bit of pause of recognition. It was a comment from Stephanie about the importance of acknowledging the importance of service that individual provided and the model that it provides. So I see a couple of other panelists have some thoughts as well. So Mary, did you something you were thinking about?
I was just also reading the comment from Stephanie and thinking that was such a good suggestion to really honor, to remind your colleagues about how dedicated the person was, how important the organization was, and to go ahead in their honor. I mean, I think that can be a motivating and a reassuring approach. I just really liked that idea.
Yeah, I already have so we're an animal the main one is an animal organization. Now we already have a little stone garden started. So I already ordered his stone and have that in the process. So that's one way I've already planned that, but it's just kind of hard because I have to replace him on my board.
Yeah.
As well. So to get through that conversation, I know it's like you said, we're resilient. It's just a new experience for me. I've had a struggle where people forcibly left, but I've never had to really deal with a close. And I guess I'm fortunate in that respect, but also it's a new experience. So thank you for your feedback.
You bet.
Hey, Renee, can I say one thing? I know we're right at time, but have you listened to any of Brene Brown's talks, like her TED Talks about vulnerability and courage? I just feel like I think that you could frame these conversations around letting people mourn and be vulnerable. This is a big loss for the organization. And to everyone else's point, I also think there's something about being authentic and being who you are and not trying to act tough and not act like it doesn't matter to you. Like, be real, because most people are probably feeling the same exact way, and it's okay to not acknowledge that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you all.